everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Danny.
And I'm 𝐿𝐿𝐵𝐿.
And this is our 64th episode. Thanks so much for tuning in again, guys. It's really great to have you back. And we also wanted to say thank you so much for the support on the last episode we put out. It was definitely one of the harder episodes to click publish on because it is a touchy subject, but we received a ton of positive feedback, and I just wanted to say thanks for that.
So other than that, I feel like wrapping up the summer has been a little lackluster, but I gotta say, well, part of me is sort of expecting the disappointment of the fall being different because 2020, but another part of me is like, yay, fall in New England. It's just a nice season. It's nice to be outdoors. The weather is beautiful. I feel like it's the best time of the year around here, actually.
Well, obviously, it's not like a nice season. It's the best season by a landslide. No matter where you are in the country, the best season is autumn in New England, period. Hands down, it is the best. It's the reason that we live here. So I am super, super excited for fall. But yeah, this year is definitely going to be different. I'm already mourning the loss of all the haunted houses for this year.
Is there any chance that those haunted houses, like any of them, are going to run?
No. I mean, I don't see how they possibly could. It would be so pathetic. They wouldn't be able to come anywhere near you, like ghouls with masks on. It would be awful, really.
Well, I mean,
but I'm really sad about it.
There's got to be some sort of creative way to spook the hell out of people.
I'm kind of hoping that the drive-in theaters run through the fall and do like more horror movies because the sun sets earlier, so the movies can start earlier. I'm hoping for that. I don't know. I have to come up with something new for this fall because all of my plans are basically thwarted as of right now.
I mean, like maybe putting us in an isolation chamber too soon, perhaps?
Last year we did the getting buried alive thing, remember?
Yeah.
That freaked a lot of people out that we did that.
I thought it was funny.
It was funny. It was funny because, like, the coffin that they put us in, it, like, shook, and there was a story through the speakers, like you were being driven to the graveyard or something. It was funny. Anyway, but I'm also nervous about as we go into the cooler months because everybody's just going to be driven back inside, and I assume that the combination of that, the regular flu season coming back around, kids going back to school, which is still a giant question mark. Yeah, I'm nervous for what's in store, obviously because, you know, I'm nervous about the coronavirus and more people getting infected and dying, and, you know, we got hit really hard pretty early here, and that was scary to see, like, the people here that we knew getting infected. We've had clients get it and deal with repercussions even after they are over it, like they don't have it anymore, but they're still dealing with some pretty intense issues, which is wild. But also, I don't know what the hell people are going to do if we are all driven into some kind of isolation for the next, you know, the 6 months that is the New England winter, it seems. I don't know if I can handle it again.
I mean, throw the election on top of that. And I had to say it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, I just got a little bit queasy. So yeah, we're doing great. I didn't even know this was a holiday weekend. One of my clients mentioned it in a check-in this morning, and I was like, oh yeah, it's Labor Day weekend. Did you know? I didn't know.
No, Mama Koala, which is what I call Danny's mom, aka my mother-in-law. I was talking to her this morning. She's like, "You gonna do anything for the holiday?" I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, probably not, but maybe we should." In a twist,
Giacomo will be leading today's discussion, so I don't even know what we're talking about today.
What could possibly go wrong? Well, today I wanted to talk about type A people and how they find balance, basically. And I want to bring this topic to the surface because I feel like I am definitely a type A person. I think Danny is as well. And suffice it to say, I would wager that the majority of people who get into bodybuilding tend to lean towards being type A people. And I think that there's a benefit to that, because where there's a will, there's a way, and anything you want to become an expert at, essentially, or you want to do really well consistently for a long period of time, requires a certain degree of more than just focus. Like that type of person who is going to be meticulous, that type of person who is going to demand planning and the need for it in their life and in their lifestyle to do something really, really well. That being said, I feel like type A people can take things to an unhealthy place. And I also believe that there are certain types of scenarios where being a type A person can actually render that individual powerless. I feel like it can almost result in worse than procrastination, actual self-sabotage, because when you have to let a plan come to you and you just absolutely need to be a planner, then there are consequences to that, because it's more than just anxiety inducing, it's actually inefficient. And this year has taught me that lesson. It's one of those situations where I feel the need to be in control. By being a type A person, it makes me feel better, it quells my anxiety. But then when I realize that I don't have the ability to do that, or I shouldn't be doing that, I become a worse person as a result, and a more inefficient person as a result. As crazy as it sounds, this year has taught me all about the need for balance and my limitations as that type of person who demands that my lifestyle fits neatly into a box, so to speak.
Let's back up. What is a type A personality? What is it?
A type A personality is someone who basically needs to have their ducks in a row. Someone who enjoys planning things to the letter, schedule-oriented, task-oriented. Someone who basically needs their life curated, in a sense.
Okay, so when I looked it up, it looked like, so there's type A, B, and C personality traits. I don't even know what C is, to be honest. But it's not something they diagnose you with. They're not like, I'm sorry, you have the type A personality. But it's more like a series of personality traits. And growing up, I always thought type A people, personality traits, very driven, very organized, very ambitious, right? I think this is what most of us think of when we think of type A personalities. But when I actually looked it up, there are lots of other personality traits that go along in that category, including aggression, competitiveness, impatience. So I think a lot of times we talk about type A personalities like they're kind of the goal, right? Oh, type A people, they just have everything put together. But there's a lot of negatives that come along with that too, it seems like. And what I have seen from a fitness and nutrition standpoint, I mean, certainly I've seen this with people in other areas of their life as well, but from a fitness and nutrition standpoint, in some ways, I feel like type A people kind of have it worse, because when things are not going their way, when things are not going the way they planned, they literally have no idea how to roll with the punches. And a lot of times they just do the exact opposite. It's like, well, if I can't have this my way, then I might as well just eat this entire cheesecake and never lift a weight again. And it's like, whoa, what are you doing?
Eating an entire cheesecake, whoa.
So in my experience, a lot of times when we talk about an all or nothing mentality, type A people kind of have that on lock, that all or nothing personality.
Yeah. And I feel like you can wield that to your advantage and know when to have that kind of behavior and to plan things that way, and when to let it go. And I hate to go back to the beginning of this year, because let's be real here, no one is enjoying 2020. And if you are, you're full of it, okay? But I'm going to go back, and we're still in it, and it's getting worse in some ways. It's getting better in some ways, getting worse in other ways. When this pandemic hit, and present company included, I feel like the majority of our clients, ourselves, and most of the world were like, holy crap, what do? We need to get ourselves together. We need to have a plan. What's the plan? And then there was the other side of the coin where people were like, well, let's let the plan come to us. And I feel like the answer was kind of in between, where there was some sort of like, okay, we need to organize our life a little bit. And there was some like, hey, let's like let this unfold a little bit. There were the extreme ends where one could have been like, I'm just going to keep letting the plan come to me and it'll come to me eventually, right? No, false. That's when like everything goes to pot. And then the alternative where those were just stuck in that type A kind of personality where they were like, I need this to happen, I need this to happen, I need this to change, everything is bad. And that's where I feel like there was failure on both ends as far as how to get through this. Where I found that a balance was being struck was where, regardless of where you were coming from, you took a little time basically to balance yourself out. Like for me personally, for example, I knew that to feel put together, I needed to train. It anchors me. It just keeps me sane. I made a pact with myself when I was like, I don't know, in my early 20s, after I'd stopped training for all, like when I start training again, this is it. This is what I do for the rest of my life, and that's that. And anything less is gonna make me feel worse. And if I train even fewer than 3 times a week, I'm screwed. And then I realized that that was a non-option. And I could have went crazy train, but I decided, you know what? No. There are other things that can anchor me, and I still have things that I can look at as an opportunity to realize what's really important to me. Relationships with my family. My basic needs were being met. And I was okay with realizing that I was a lot more privileged than I realized because most of my basic needs were already met, even if I was limited in the way that I could live my life, even if I couldn't go grocery shopping every week, even if I had no ability to train, even if I had to focus on other things as opposed to myself. Like everything was still going to get done, essentially. It was just going to take a little bit of time to reestablish a new routine. So my question to you, Danny, is what was it like when the pandemic hit as far as how you had to change the way you did things? And what were your weaknesses and what were your strengths based on your personality?
Well, you know, I actually don't know if I'm a type A person, which is probably surprising for you to even hear. I think that type A personality traits get conflated with anxiety a lot, actually. Like, are you a type A person or do you have massive anxiety? Because I feel like it could be either. It's really a coin flip in a lot of situations. Like, are you doing this because you're super driven, or is anxiety causing you to feel like you need to have everything planned down to the last second? I don't know. I don't know if I'm a type A person or if I'm just a type B person with massive anxiety.
I never thought of it like that.
I mean, you know, a lot of these traits that people say, oh, you're so organized, you're so planned, you have everything down to the letter. Like, yeah, that sounds cool. But if the driving factor behind why you're that way is that you are terrified of what happens if you're not that way, is that really that good? I don't know. I don't think so. So I think that I kind of had to learn to roll with the punches a long ass time ago. A long, long time ago. I am talking like 2nd grade. People were concerned with how nervous I was about not having things organized or planned out appropriately. Like, I would not be able to fall asleep because I would be thinking about how I had this particular project the next day and it had to go well or else blah, blah, blah. So at like the ripe age of 6, I couldn't sleep because I was too worried about having everything just so. So it's been a long, long time of me learning to not obsess and how those kinds of behaviors taken to a certain degree don't actually benefit me. They actually hurt me. So I often, you know, it's like you said, these things can be really powerful. If you can tap into those things when you need them, that's great. But also if you're using organization and planning and checking off all your boxes, specifically just as a coping mechanism for the fact that everything else feels wildly out of control, I won't say that's necessarily bad, but I think it's worth acknowledging. Like, to this day, I still use my daily checklist. Every time I check a box off, I feel like a little bit of pressure is let out of that valve, So I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it, but I'm under no illusion that this is making me more productive to just check off every stupid thing that I did that day. It's just making me feel more in control than I actually am.
Is that okay, though, to feel that? So that you can get to the next point or the next plan of action or whatever?
I mean, I think there's a million different coping strategies for these type of things. And I don't think any of them, I think the awareness is key. You could take this over to like when people eat emotionally. Is it a choice you made? Did you say, I feel like crap tonight, I'm going to make myself a bowl of day of mac and cheese? Or was your mind a million miles away and you just found yourself halfway deep in a pot of macaroni and you don't even know what happened? If it's a conscious choice that you made, then that's something you can reckon with at some point. If it's kind of out of your control, that is a problem. If you have to check the boxes or you're going to have a meltdown, if you have to get your workout in or hit your macros or you're going to have a meltdown, that's not good. And in those cases, or do we want to call it a type A personality? Do we want to call it anxiety? Do we want to call it, an obsessive compulsive situation? It could be any one of those things. And we're just painting it with a really nice brush of, oh, you're so type A. But if it's taken to the extreme and you can't stop it, then it's a problem.
Well, that kind of borders on what I feel is like obsessive compulsive kind of.
That's what I just said.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more along the lines of, even if it's not a meltdown, it literally, for me personally, like, I feel differently. I feel like that kind of behavior doesn't lead to meltdowns per se, but for everyone, I think it can also literally just lead to procrastination and wasting one's time, which ultimately leads to dissatisfaction and an unhealthy place where you think you're accomplishing more than you actually are, and you're sort of in la la land and being completely unrealistic. And then all of a sudden you turn around 5 years later and it's like, wow, it's hard for me to take accountability about why my life sucks because I can't understand why it sucks. But the truth is that you were caught up in this rut where you were unable to look at reality because you get stuck in this cycle where you think that you're doing more than you actually are because you're wasting your time. That, to me...
Right, it's a distraction from
correct.
Other issues.
Yeah, as opposed to the whole, oh my gosh, this is bad, and you're freaking out. Like, I think there's so many different ways this can play out.
Yeah, well,
honestly.
there's lots of varying degrees, and I think it all comes down to asking yourself why you're doing something. Mm-hmm. And I piss 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐷 off with this all the time, where he'll be like, well, I have to blah, 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 blah. And I'll be like, but why? And he's like, well, because I have to, because it's on my list. I said I was going to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but why? He's giving me a dirty look right now. Mm. And, sometimes there's a perfectly valid answer as to why. And sometimes you just keep asking why until you realize you're just doing it just to do it for no reason. And you're wasting your time that could probably have been spent better in another way. Right?
Sure, why not?
Anyway, so this is interesting because obviously I think there are also definitely huge pitfalls in being a type B person, right? Where it's just like you just can't seem to find the drive and motivation to like get it together. That's a thing too, for sure. But in this particular instance, like you said, people drawn to bodybuilding, very driven, very competitive, very assertive, very impatient, high achievers. They identify themselves by their achievements. So we see a lot of this in competitors or people who want to be competitors. And a lot of times in those instances, our job, I guess, kind of is to identify if there's unhealthy / unhelpful behaviors that people are just latching onto that probably aren't doing them any good, and then also help them to pull back and find, what matters, what doesn't matter, and how to balance those things. So how do you help people kind of pull back from those situations?
And I want to expand upon that a little more because you brought a good topic to the surface before I answer the question. I do feel like our industry not only breeds that kind of behavior, I feel like it rewards it because it's like if you want to delve in the fitness industry and the bodybuilding industry specifically, then you got to play the game. And if this is how everyone's behaving and you want to like dabble and socialize, well, you're probably going to be peer pressured into adopting that kind of mindset. Or in essence, it's sort of, it's a place for you to thrive if that's how you already are. And it's kind of like, how do you stop?
Right. Well, there's some truth to a lot of that. And I feel like we spend so much time talking about the opposite that maybe we should do an entire podcast about how, like, no, guess what? If you want to achieve these goals, you have to dig, you have to push. I feel like maybe you and I, 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐞, maybe we don't say that enough. This shit is not easy. You have to push out of your comfort zone. It's going to be hard, and you're going to need to find some strength inside you didn't even freaking know was there. But, you know, everybody else is already saying that, and that's all they're saying. And they're never saying, you know, hey, let's back off a little bit. It's for your own benefit if we kind of chill out a little bit. So if it seems like, you know, maybe we say that a lot, we have to chill out, we have to find some balance, you need to take a step back, it's because so many people have had it drilled into their head that if they're not giving 110% all of the time, then they're not working hard enough. When in actuality, not only is that not possible, guys, you cannot give 110%. You literally can't. But if you tried to do that all the time, you would actually be doing yourself a tremendous disservice by putting your body under so much stress, which we've talked about in our stress episode. With type A people specifically, a lot of times when they come into the fitness community, they are drawn to those coaches. They are drawn to those communities that are like, do or die, you will sleep when you're dead. All of the other like super hardcore, like somebody else is working harder than you. Rah! So they're really drawn to that. And, you know, they do that shit for a while and then they're like, I feel like I'm dying. I'm not making the progress I thought that I was gonna make. I literally can't push any harder. What gives? And then they start poking around and then, you know, we hope that they hear from somebody who has something to say like we do. Like, hey, guess what? Sometimes you gotta back off. Once you start having conversations with those people, it's not as easy as just like, oh, okay, we're just gonna back off a little bit. And they're like, huh, great, why didn't I think of that? And then it's just perfect going forward. Like, no, it is very hard to convince somebody to do less to achieve more, to relax more, to sleep more, to enjoy their family more in order to be a better bodybuilder. Like, that almost sounds like it doesn't make sense, but it does. So how do you do it? How do you, as a coach, when you get one of these people and you know the type of people, how do you start to convince them to chill out?
This is not something that happens in one conversation. This is not something that is a direct statement. And this is something that takes a while to unpack. And honestly, sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes the client splits straight up. They just stop working with you, or it's like they just never come to it. But it is definitely the goal. I feel like it's the goal for at least half of the people that we work with. And it's something that happens over time. I feel like the first thing that needs to happen is gaining that person's trust by literally giving them what they want. Okay, you want to track stuff, you want to create charts and all this stuff, and to some degree it does work for you. Let's do just that. And I sneak in little tiny things here and there over the course of future check-ins where it's not a requirement. I don't say, hey, you need to chill, or like, hey, don't track. It's suggested. And then there's there's a lot of nuance to this. It's an art form. The person has to come to it themselves. Like anything else that makes someone work and tick, they have to know that it's their idea or they're not going to do it. So basically, long story short, you sneak in these little ideas, and then when they come back and they're sort of like, you know the type, right? They sort of like talk to you like they're failing and they're vulnerable enough to tell you like, hey, I don't think I'm adhering. Instead of playing to that, you echo what you're trying to give them all along, like, oh, cool, look at you being flexible and balanced. That's neat. And by the way, we're getting results and we have more results. And oh, neato, there's less stress in your life from all kinds of ways, from all kinds of angles, So I bet anything there'll be more progress on the horizon and we'll actually be able to load in more fatigue and get you further along. So it's sort of like building an environment with them as opposed to dictating policy and being like, what we're doing is wrong. It really is an art form.
Yeah, and it really varies from person to person too. But actually, I take a very similar approach to that. And the trust is so important. Because if someone comes to you and they're like, I want to get leaner, and you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to add 1,000 calories and I want you to stop all cardio today. They're going to be like, okay, no, goodbye. So you have to meet them where they are with little baby steps. And again, it does always depend on the person, like what the actual tactics that you use are. But I do think you have to be diligent because it's going to be uncomfortable. One of the tools that I implement with a lot of people, most people I would say, is a free meal. And a free meal is a meal where you don't track it. You eat kind of whatever you want, like whatever you feel like, whatever you're in the mood for, and you eat until you are pleasantly full. So if you want pizza and a scoop of ice cream, you can totally have pizza and a scoop of ice cream. It's one meal. And there are so many reasons for this. I could get into that in another time, but there's a lot of physical reasons, there's a lot of psychological reasons that we keep this in, but it is so hard, especially for very type A people, to be like, I'm sorry, but how, wait, what are the rules for the free meal? And then they come back the next week and they're like, I hate it, I don't want to do it anymore. And you're like, no, I'm sorry, we're going to keep doing it. We just have to keep getting better at this. It's going to get better. You're going to feel more comfortable with it. They're like, but yeah, did I have too much? And I'll be like, did it feel like you had too much? On a scale of 1 to 10, how full were you? And sometimes they're like, it was like a 10. I felt like I was going to be sick because I ate so much. It's like, yeah, you probably had too much. Nothing bad is going to happen. It's a learning experience. Now you know what a 10 feels like. Let's try to not eat to a 10. Let's try to eat to like an 8 next time. And it does get better, but it's hard. Every week it's hard. You know, a free meal sounds like, woohoo, this is going to be so fun. But actually it's one of the most challenging things for a type A person who's been like pushing and, you know, controlling every single minute of their life to have like this meal where they get to, wait, what? Pick what they want to eat and not have somebody look over their shoulder and not have to weigh it and not have to plug it in. It's really, really hard. And then over time, what happens? I was actually talking to one of my longtime clients yesterday, maybe the day before, and we were talking about how at the end of her last prep, the second she finished her free meal, she already knew what she wanted for her next free meal. Like, that's how much she loved the free meal. She was so food focused. All she could think about was these delicious foods, which of course is not good. We've talked about that in the past. The free meal was something that she like loved and hated at the same time. That's another really common thing. They enjoy it, but then immediately after they're like, hate it, hate everything about that. Now it's like a year later. We've been doing this every single week. Yeah, it's a year later. And she's like, I don't even care about my free meal anymore. She's like, I enjoy it when I have it, like it's good, but I'm not thinking about it all week. In fact, I let my partner pick where we had our free meal this week, which if you've ever been in prep, you know you're not letting anybody else pick where your free meal is. So, you know, there's progress and it looks different than what a lot of people might think fitness progress to look like. You know, we wouldn't think, oh, going out to a restaurant and kind of like, I could kind of take it or leave it. That's a huge win. That is a huge, huge, huge win because guess what? Then food does not control you and you don't feel like you have to control it all the time either.
Yeah, all the alternative where perhaps you need to feel like you undereat and you need to undereat to maintain a certain physique and you intentionally do so as opposed to just not thinking about food whatsoever. And then 2, 3, 4 months later, as long as you're moving in the right direction, whether the goal is to gain or lose, then you're okay. So to Danny's point, basically not letting food control you.
Other things, people thinking they have to make progress every time they go to the gym. They have to be hitting some kind of PR every time they go to the gym. And of course, this happens when you first get into fitness. Every time you train, you've made an increase. And then it stops happening, and then you feel like you're failing. And you're not failing. That's what happens as you get better. Like, yes, hopefully you can beat your book. The goal is to beat your book every single time. But sometimes you're beating your book for an entire workout with like 1 rep on 1 exercise. That's still beating the book. That's still improvement. And some weeks, you're not going to be able to lift what you lifted the week prior. Hopefully that doesn't happen every week. But the more advanced you become and the harder you push in general, the less you can just progress linearly with your weights at the gym.
And there are other times, depending on what your goals are, where you will actually not be progressing for a matter of years, even if you don't get injured, because you had some sort of a accelerated goal, like competing, for example, that is part of your training career. So, and those are tough pills to swallow for some people who demand that they just continue to improve and get better over time. But I think it's a matter of perspective and what kind of experience you're looking for as an athlete. And there are certain things that have, I don't want to say consequences, but there are sacrifices to be made. And it's a matter of understanding what things will look like in 5, 10, 15 years when you do something for a year or two, and accepting and being okay with that, and knowing, hey, you can still wind up progressing in the future. You're just going to have maybe a couple crappy years or what have you, or a couple of years to rebuild. And that's literally part of it.
So I think, I bring it back to anxiety. I think that's one of the things that type A people feel the most when they're actually trying to find more balance in their life, is they feel anxious that they're no longer doing enough, that they're no longer controlling the variables that they can control to the degree that they ought to be. And I think it's very, very valuable to have some kind of guidance if this is what you're trying to do. So I remember my most neurotic phases of bodybuilding. It was actually very shortly after Giacomo and I got together. I mean, I was obsessed with like trying to find the perfect meal plan for me, which of course now I kind of laugh at that, but this was 12 years ago. I could, to this day, I can pull out the notebooks. I have notebooks full of me writing out workout plans and me writing out meal plans and playing with different macronutrients to try to find the most perfect thing for me. And then, checking that box every single day. And it was eating up all my mental energy. Looking back, I can now see that my life was so incredibly stressful at that time that this was obviously a coping mechanism for not dealing with everything else that was going on in my life. But the fact that I was trying to navigate that alone, I think, is what left me in that place for probably the better part of 2 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. It was dark. It was really, really dark. But on the outside, it looked like I was just an incredibly high achiever. And that is the thing you have to be careful about with these sorts of things. And that is the thing you have to be careful about with these sorts of things, is that from the outside, it doesn't just look okay, it looks good. It looks like something you should shoot for. But in reality, it can be an incredibly dark time. This is not to say that every person that you see on the internet that seems aspirational, that does not mean that they are all having a dark time, because that's the thing. Is a lot of times you cannot tell from the outside if someone is doing well or if someone is really, really struggling with their own sense of perfectionism to a point where it is impacting their inner world more than you could possibly know. So you could take 10 physiques in front of you that look outstanding, and 5 of them could be like living their best lives, and the other 5 of them could be in their own personal hells, and you wouldn't know from the outside at all.
And this is one of those things where it creates a shelf life for how long someone can do something like compete, and also there's repercussions that are worse off while competing, and then even worse after the fact when you have to work on yourself and hopefully get back to a healthy, balanced place. And it doesn't have to be that way. And on the surface, it's easy to just chalk it up to being like, well, that's just the nature of competing. That's just the way it is. Sacrifice, hustle even harder. And that's what this took. And then afterwards, may the chips fall where they lie. We'll just be all right. The truth is that it doesn't have to be that way. You can be well aware of the sacrifices that need to be made while still not suffering the consequences of basically being more unbalanced than you need to while competing.
Yeah, so, I do think that there is a very high level of sacrifice that needs to happen to compete. We know that. We've done it. We've talked about it. You do have to be a lot more organized. You have to be a lot more nitpicky about every little thing when you're actually in prep. But you have to go into it, one, knowing that's coming, knowing, okay, I'm going to have to turn this up to a 10. And also knowing that it is temporary. Because a lot of people, especially first-time competitors, no one tells them that this prep thing is temporary. No one tells them that when this is over, they will transition back to a much more normal life. So first-time competitors, they do this prep and then they think, okay, this is my life now. This is how I am forever. And they have no idea how to transition back to something a lot closer to just like a normal, fit, healthy life. So you have to kind of have that understanding before you go into it, because it does require a lot of sacrifice, but it should be temporarily. If you can, try to think of these sort of type A personalities, the controlling as much as you can control. You have to think about that like a dimmer switch. Like during prep, you crank that thing up, and then as you come out of prep, you bring it back down to a nice tolerable level of, okay, these are the things I can control. These are the things I think are important to be controlling right now. And all these other things are things I can be much more flexible with. If you don't know how to bring that back down, then you don't know. Then you're just stuck running on all cylinders, cranked up to 11. You feel like you're stuck there. It's an anxiety loop that you are stuck in. That's why I hesitate to just say, oh, type A personalities, because I really do think there's this massive, massive overlap between what we think of as type A and what is actually just anxiety. I would love to hear what you guys think about this. Like, is it just me? Am I the only one who thinks this? Because I think if I didn't have anxiety fueling me a good chunk of the time, I would probably Netflix and chill a lot more than I do. I probably wouldn't work 12-hour days every day. I would probably know that it was a holiday weekend coming up. This is not me being type A. This is me having mental illness.
I'm almost wondering if you're like fantasizing about a lifestyle like that as a competitor, and if you would or would not wind up being that type A kind of person anyway.
What do you mean?
I mean, like, say that there were zero responsibilities and you had all the resources in the world and you can compete, and basically the responsibilities were low. Would you still wind up being a type A person by nature because it's sort of required?
No, I totally see that as well. So I have friends who are so well off. Like the kind of well off that I can't really wrap my head around. Like they live on a mansion plantation with a gym in their house that looks like 24-hour fitness. It's madness. And they're competitors, and they're still just as type A. They're making lists of their lists of things to pack and checking everything off and blah, blah, blah. So is that type A? Is that all positive? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe my vision of this is just skewed because of who I am and where I come from. And I think it's really important to acknowledge our own biases as well.
Correct. And the easy ways that we can mask this kind of stuff with any number of things. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's mindset work and there's no replacement for that.
Totally. I agree.
Moving on to our question and answer segment for today. First one is for you, Danny. Any recommendations on foods for inflammation? I've been eating a lot of kale and other fruits, veggies, potatoes, and beans. I have a slap tear in my right shoulder and would rather not do surgery, but I love lifting.
So unfortunately, an actual tear might not be able to be fixed through just an anti-inflammatory diet or rest. A tear might need surgery no matter what. But I had another friend ask me about an anti-inflammatory diet recently. She's dealing with some arthritis, and their food actually can play a large role in terms of inflammation and what you can do with it. So plant-based foods in general, more anti-inflammatory than the meat counterparts, right? So lots of fresh fruits, veggies, things like that, very important. But what is probably even more important, in my opinion, is what you avoid. So the number one thing that I would recommend avoiding if you're trying to avoid inflammatory foods that I think is kind of challenging on a plant-based diet is omega-6s. Omega-6s. So omega-6s are inflammatory. Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. So omega-6s, we're looking at vegetable oils primarily. Like vegetable oil is in any packaged food that you can buy. Almost any packaged food is going to have some kind of vegetable oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, etc. And vegetable oil is a super high omega-6. So trying to keep that low while also boosting your omega-3s, I would say primarily through a supplement, honestly. Like, yes, chia seeds, flax seeds, all those very good for you, but they're not quite as high in omega-3s as we would like them to be, particularly in the world that we live in where we do eat processed foods. They're high in omega-6s. In a perfect world, I have actually heard some people say that our 3 to 6 ratio should be 1 to 1. I don't even know how that would be possible. More frequently, I hear 4 to 1. So 4 times the omega-6s to 1 part omega-3s. Even to do that is very challenging. The average vegetarian is 24 to 1. So that's the ratio of omega-6s to 3s that the average vegetarian, whatever that means, is getting. So decreasing the omega-6s, increasing the omega-3s. So I would recommend a microalgae oil to increase those 3s. We like the Testa brand, we've mentioned it before, and decreasing your vegetable oils and checking your ingredient labels to see where the vegetable oils are. That would be my main takeaway. All of the other stuff you're already eating is fantastic. Keep doing that. Oh my God, I have to read 𝐬𝐿's handwriting.
Good luck with that.
Okay. Which muscle groups should I work out first? Large or small? I am getting different answers on the web and talking to trainers. Your thoughts on this are welcome.
There is no one simple answer for this, and typically it makes sense to prioritize larger muscle groups first. Where this gets tricky is after someone's been training for at least 6 months to a year, and definitely after they've been training for more than 3 years in a row and their goal is physique based, because it really depends on what kind of muscle groups you want to bring up and how your genetics are being expressed. So in other words, what you want to look like and what body parts are growing faster on you and what body parts are growing slower on you. From a fatigue standpoint, it makes sense to do those larger groups first and also to do compound movements first. But that being said, there are times where you may not want to do a compound movement first if you want to prioritize building up a certain muscle group. So for example, say you have arms that you want to grow. Logically, maybe you'll train bench first because your arms are getting trained. But my thought process here is there's no harm in training your arms at the beginning of a workout if they need to catch up and you're going to get fatigued from doing your bench in the beginning of the workout. You can do your bench halfway through the workout. There's no problem with that once you become well trained if your goal is physique based. If your goal is strength based, I think it's a no-brainer. Start with the compounds and larger muscle groups first in pretty much every scenario, unless it's not a sole focus on strength. But if your goal is physique based, I think the lines are blurred, especially as you become more well trained and you realize that there are certain body parts you want to bring up.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the podcast today, please feel free to go ahead and leave this a review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you are listening, even YouTube. We upload these to YouTube as well. Those reviews, even if it's just clicking a star rating, really helps to boost our podcast in the algorithm so that other people can see it, and hopefully we can get this message out to more folks interested in bodybuilding, interested in veganism. We really, really appreciate that. Thanks so much, guys. And if you're interested in any kind of coaching, whether it's one-on-one coaching or group coaching or just becoming a part of our community, please check out VeganProteins.com.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. Feel free to stay in touch with us at Vegan Proteins and at Muscles by Brussels on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and all the social medias. Shoot us an email at veganproteins@gmail.com with any feedback or questions that you have. We're always here for you. Once again, my name's 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞.
And I'm Danny.
And we'll talk to you soon.